This is Digesting Black History 365 podcast, where our history is the world's history. And what we're doing right now is making sure that people start digesting Black history again because it's very important. It's something that we know that we need each and every day of our lives, especially our young Black youth and some of our adults. So, once again, this is Digesting Black History 365 podcast. I would like for you to share, like, and subscribe to us. This is a podcast that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years. And with my host, she always like to say co-host, but my host, Gwen Moore, she has been so essential to this platform. And as we've been trying to do so much more with bringing people to the table of Black history. And I think we've been doing pretty good. Don't you agree,
Oh,
Gwen?
yeah, absolutely. And I think during this period when there seems to be sort of this attack on Black history and including our stories, the importance of our stories, it's really critical that we really focus on the Black past because, our history is U.S. history, and you cannot teach American history. You cannot even teach world history without including the history of African Americans. And we want to make sure that everyone knows that and understands that.
And yeah, so we're going to start really expanding on this because me and Gwen been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years. And then I also started out, I got to pay homage to Tavon Brooks. He was a big part of, the inception of it. And like I said, it's been almost about 3 years. But now we're getting ready to start really this really spinning the wheels and getting this thing down the road. Because once again, this is a byproduct of the Betterment Road Incorporated, which we do community outreach, we do an after school program, and we doing a podcast. So let's just really get into this interview. I have to say, young lady to come on and just be a part of this because she is the sister of Gwen Moore and she is author Malaika Horne-Wells. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, ma'am. And how are you doing today?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me, both of you, and I'm doing well.
Yes. Well, once again, like I shared with you, we want to get just a little bit of your backstory, because that's how we set up our platform. Normally everybody start reading off all their superlatives and everything like that. But what we try to do is just let this be your interview because we want to first and foremost let everybody know that we have a book that we will be talking about, your book, Mother Wit. And we want to get first some of your backstory. So please tell us about Malaika, author Malaika Horne-Wells.
Well, first, let me say, when you mentioned that you wanted me to talk about 5 minutes about myself, I realized I'm not used to talking about myself. I'm always talking about other things and other people, and so bear with me if I don't meet your standards for the first question. But I am a child of Mill Creek Valley, which was a thriving community up until the early 1960s. By the early 1960s, it had almost all been demolished. And so I was a child of urban renewal. And in thinking about your question, I thought, wow, that particular part of my childhood had a big influence on my life and my career, because I remember when I got a master's in urban affairs from St. Louis University, I chose urban affairs to try to figure out, why did we have to move from Mill Creek? Why did they turn down this community of 20,000, mostly African Americans? Why did my parents lose their home when they scraped and worked so hard to have their own home, which As you know, in American society, they really push home ownership, and then they compare African Americans to white Americans and other Americans regarding the percentage of home ownership, when many of these African Americans own their own homes, and they not only were able to, through eminent domain, force us to sell our home, they didn't really give us adequate compensation. And so then that fits into the wealth gap, because in the United States, white Americans, all Americans, most of their wealth comes from home ownership. And so this looks like a policy designed to keep us marginalized, to keep us dependent, to keep us not having the kind of wealth that we need, not only to pass on to the next generation, because they're always talking about intergenerational wealth, passing on your wealth to the next generation, which is important. But what about experiencing the pleasures of life with the kind of economics that we need right here? But when we moved from a predominantly Black neighborhood to a predominantly white neighborhood, the class shocks were really astounding for us. Even as children, we could pick up on the difference and the racial bias, not only the race bias from the white people, but the class bias from the children and families of the Black children and families of the professional class. So I think I learned early on how to navigate all these different traps that try to keep us marginalized and really kind of stuck in this permanent underclass that they always talk about. And my mother's emphasis on education, because she believed if we got educated, we'd be able to understand this culture and what we needed to do to overcome it in order to raise our standard of living and make more of a contribution to society.
Can I add something?
Mhm.
And I think Malaika Horne is being modest. She is Dr. Malaika Horne. She has a PhD in public policy analysis. And I'm not gonna list all of her accolades because they're too long, but I just want to make that clear, because she mentioned her master's in urban affairs, but she also has a PhD.
And since you mentioned it, I have a postdoc from Washington University Medical School.
Okay.
See. That's why I love this. I love this interview just as well as when we had Gerald on.
Yeah.
See, I knew. See, and that's why I told Gwen. I said, no matter how this thing goes, we talking about positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about how this thing has a growth in it. And when people get to seeing more and more of these episodes, it's gonna make them, look at themselves in the mirror and say, now what have I done versus what Dr. Horne's, Dr. Wells have done, Gwen Moore, what have they done? Marvin Glenn, what have he done? So yes. I just want to ask a question. Where did you all move after Mill Creek?
We moved to North St. Louis on Dryden and Lee, which at the time, as I mentioned, was predominantly white, but didn't stay predominantly white long. And that's one thing that I think that I'd like to convey to African Americans. If we could just stop trying to move into predominantly white neighborhoods, thinking that all our problems will be solved. That's not true. Because every time you do that, within, I would say, a matter of several years, you're going to end up in another predominantly Black neighborhood with similar problems. The police are not going to change toward you. The school system is not going to change toward you. The banking system is not going to change toward you. All of these institutions have been racialized to discriminate against African Americans and other people. But I think maybe besides Native Americans, we're the most discriminated group, and we have to unify, and we don't always have to stay in our own communities. For example, you have Chinatown, you have Little Italy, you have Little Vietnam. So you have Harlem, St. Louis. Mill Creek used to be the Harlem of St. Louis, but they got rid of it and then erased the history. In fact, they don't even call it Mill Creek anymore. They call it Downtown West. So I think that this is ground zero for unifying African Americans, that we need our own communities, not that you have to stay there. I think Gwen has mentions W.E.B. Du Bois. Don't you talk about that, Gwen, about
W.B. Du Bois, who, in fact, who was one of the founding members of the National Association for Colored People, the NAACP. And of course, the NAACP was very integrationist. And of course, W.B. Du Bois was integrationist. But at some point, he realized that integration wasn't happening. And he decided that we should do everything in our power to just strengthen our own communities. And he called it voluntary segregation or congregation, and that we could strengthen our own communities because he said we might not have the resources, but we have the talent. And I love that we have the talent, that we can do anything, even if we don't have the resources. And so W.B. Du Bois, of course, is the premier intellectual of the 20th century. Some people say the premier Black intellectual, but he was the premier intellectual, Black, white, whatever. And he's somebody that I think we should all know his work because it is profound.
yes.
Can I ask one more question? Because
Sure.
I just wanted to, I don't know if we want to go there quite yet, Marvin, but I want to ask Dr. Horne about her book. Can we go there?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Go in and out. It doesn't matter.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, great. Tell me about your book and why you decided to write this book.
Well, I pulled out a little passage. It's a paragraph. And if I could read this, I think it encapsulates or sums up why I wrote the book. May I read it?
Yes, you may.
Okay. To say the least, Flora's stories were dramatic about how hard she worked to hold things together. This is what she said. I remember it almost verbatim because my mother told us a lot of stories. Quote, one time all, Beverly, Malaika, I changed my name in the 1970s, Jackie, who's Gwen, and Mickey, who's Gerald, were crying at the same time. I was trying to also wash on a wringer washer and cook. She cooked, washed, and ironed almost every day. I was about out of my mind, said Mother, adding that upstairs lived Jack's brother. My father was named Jack. At least that was his nickname. Jack's brother, Lee, and his wife, Jessie Kate, and their daughter, Orville, aged 11. She was like 2 years older than Mary. Mary and William were at school. That day, Jessie Kate had company. As usual, they were laughing and talking and having a good time. They could easily hear all the loud noise of crying babies and a loud washing machine in the kitchen, but never offered to help. With the wringer washer, clothes had to be washed, then manually put through a wringer to squeeze, forcing out as much water as possible. Then hanging with clothespins outside on clotheslines. This included clothes for the entire family, sheets, towels, and other incidentals. Very time-consuming and burdensome labor, the height of household drudgery. After several hours, as soon as she had finished, and after quieting us all down, Jessie Kate yelled from upstairs, "Flora, do you need any help?" "No," she said, trying to muffle her exasperation. "I'm all right." And I think, again, that sums it up. All the work that she and other mothers, good mothers, and most mothers are good, I would say 85%, all the work they have to do with very little support. They have to birth the baby. They have to raise the baby. And if you've ever raised a child, and she had 3 babies, I was, I guess, 2, Gwen was 1, and Gerald was a little baby. And she had 3 other children. So that kind of helped me to understand I need to write a book about my mother and other mothers because they're grossly underappreciated. And as a quote I read recently, mothers are the pillars of humanity. Think about it. Without mothers, not just us as individuals, where would this civilization be?
Would be dormant.
Or dead.
Yep. Yep. Now, this leads me right to a question. It's like, man, it just flows as I'm hearing you read. When did you understand your mother's wit?
I think when I became maybe a teenager or a young adult, because I didn't know that as a child, you don't know that your parents are any different from any other parents. I didn't know that all parents didn't require going to the library, reading all these books, studying. In fact, we didn't have to do a lot of housework because she wanted us to study and read. And then she would always ask us, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think that was a really good question. Because even though we changed our careers as we got older, I remember my older brother said he wanted to be a truck driver and he became a federal judge. But we started off as children thinking about the future. And when we kind of veered off, like when I veered off my path, she would say, now you said you wanted to be in a career to help people. Well, if you want to do that, you got to go to school. You got to get educated. So, because what are you going to tell people if you don't have knowledge? So I thought all parents were like that, but they weren't.
Well, I just want to say, I think when we're young, we take our parents for granted. And you really don't really start appreciating them, like you said, until you get out into the world and you find out that maybe your mother was telling you the right stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they say, it'll come to you. Just because I didn't understand it when I was more immature didn't mean I didn't hear her. And then she appealed to our intellect. She didn't say, I'm going to whip you or punish you if you don't do what I say. She would sit down and talk to us. And so even though I didn't quite understand it as a child, I remembered it. Then when I encountered some situation that she kind of predicted would happen, then all that memory of her giving us this information, this really, that's why I think knowledge is more important than money.
It is.
It's more important. Money is important. But if you have knowledge, you will learn how to make money. But if you have money and no knowledge, just like people winning the lottery and then broke within a couple of years or less because they didn't have financial literacy. So I think passing on that knowledge about and thinking about our future, that's very important.
Very important. I have to say now, as I'm listening to that and I think about my mom, it makes me go back to some of the things that she taught me because even though she was very young when she had me, and I was raised by my grandparents, but I was able to kind of go back and forth. So I remember one particular time, even though she was supposed to be doing the chores, she had me doing the chores. And what I remember vividly, especially about hard work now, because I got it, because I was the only child. So I got my grandparents raising me and my mom, who's just piggybacking off them. So hard work was something that I learned early because once again, I was the only child. So if something was going on, because my grandfather was sickly and my grandmother was working a lot. So I had to learn how to cook early. I had to learn how to cut the grass. I had to learn how to shovel snow, all these different things while being so flustered and crying and everything like that. But as time went on, I started to shake myself. That's why I have 5 different businesses now. And thank God that I have this platform you know, to be able to express those things. But one thing I do remember her telling me, that's why I have a fondness for Frankie Beverly and Mays and Marvin Gaye. I used to be listening to them while I'm cleaning down the banisters, you know, in between the banisters. And we don't have that kind of stuff now. But back then, the banisters and sweeping down the steps and all that sort of thing. So, and then I just started being a visionary at an early age. So it kind of like puts it in the same context of what you were saying regarding like said, you know, speak to your intellect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so when you were talking, I was thinking, you know, the dominant culture, white establishment, institutions, try to be in control of a Black woman's image. And the way they image us is really contradictory to how we really are. Most Black women, as mothers, they love their children to death. In fact, some Black philosophers say that Black women love their sons and spoil their daughters. They love all their children, but they know that their sons are really at risk in this society. The other thing is that these mothers are very hardworking, but look at how the dominant society tries to portray them. So don't listen to other people when they're trying to describe your ethnic group. You tell them, you define your ethnic group. Don't let them define you.
Let me just say, you said what they usually say is Black mothers raise their daughters.
Okay.
And love their sons.
Okay.
Remember that?
Yeah. Kwanzaa Kanjufu, it was something like
exactly. Yeah.
From Chicago.
That's right. That's
and
right.
Then in the 70s and 80s, we, you know, because we were reading not only white literature, we were reading these Black philosophers, not only W.B. Du Bois, but other Black philosophers. We need to pay attention to our leaders, to people who have studied us, who know us, and who understand us and have an affinity for us. You can't follow people who they consider us their enemies. Why would you follow somebody who considers you an enemy?
Right. Exactly. See, that's what I always tell people nowadays, and me and Gwen, we talk about this all the time. We're at war. So that means that we're at war at this particular time in our lives. Yeah, we're not walking around with guns and bayonets and everything like that, but it's the war of your sensibility. You know, because a lot of things will change, will have changed, especially since COVID. You're looking at how somebody who would be able to give you something, they're not the givers anymore. They're the receivers of maybe a handout or whatever. But we're at a point in time right now that we have history that we don't need all those extras. We can take a little bit of something and make it a lot. But unfortunately, we got a Generation Z, as they call it. They're not at a point of learning about what war really means. And I guess the generation ahead of them had to explain it so they can be well equipped to be more vital.
Well, could I say this, Mr. Glenn? I don't want to do any unnecessary stereotyping, because I worked at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I saw so many together Black males. So I think let's not be manipulated by these stereotypes. Stereotypes are at the core of institutionalized racism. If you say that about Generation Z Black males, I guess you got to say it about Generation Z white males. Why is it that we're living in this primordial soup, but we're the only ones? Why are we so unique? The only reason we're unique is because of racism.
Let me just add, I think that's why we have to resist this attack on critical race theory, trying to make it something that it's not. This attack on teaching Black history, or what they want to do is teach a sanitized version of Black history, to the point where in Florida, in their curriculum, they were saying that enslaved people benefited from being enslaved. We've got to resist all these attacks on our history because they don't want, it's not just that they don't want Black people to know our history. I don't think that's what they're concerned about. They don't want white people to know our history because if they know our history, it's really an indictment of white society. And that's what they do not want.
Schindler's List, you remember that movie?
Yes.
What jumped out at me is when they were in the concentration camps and they were trying to build some building. And this Jewish woman came over to one of the soldiers and said, they're building the building all wrong. I'm an engineer, or maybe she said I'm an architect. I can show them how to do this better. And so he said, okay. And then he goes over to another soldier. And then the soldier walks over and shoots her in the head. This is in the movie. And then he says, I cannot stand a smart Jew. That's in Schindler's List.
Yeah.
So then let's then transpose that. Can they stand smart Black people?
Well,
I think not if you challenge them. And I think somebody like Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with the concept of critical race theory, yeah, she's under attack because, she's challenging the narrative that they're trying to present, that this is the home of the brave, the land of the free, that it's a free and equal society, that all you have to do is like the old ratio algebra myth. If you work hard, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so they use that to explain, well, Black people don't seem to be doing well. So it's not the fault of the larger society. And as some white and Black conservatives say, it's personal responsibility. Is something wrong with Black people? There's nothing wrong with this society. And I think that's what we have to push back against. And I know we're going kind of far afield because we're not really focusing so much on your book, but I don't know, maybe that's fine, Marvin. I'll let you take the lead on this.
No, I always tell you the way we kind of flow, we flow with different angles.
Okay.
And tell you, see, the book itself comes from your mother. And all these different things that you all are saying because it still gratifies your mother.
And let me say something about my mother. I always say my mother was a race woman. She had a strong Black consciousness. And I'm really grateful for that. Because even as little children, she was trying to infuse us with this sense of Blackness and pride in being Black. I mean, we were saying, I don't know if we were saying it, but we had this feeling before James Brown came out with "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud," because that's what she wanted us to feel about ourselves and our neighbors, our friends, our relatives, our people. And she told stories that amplified that. And so I really appreciate that now because I like to think that I have a strong Black consciousness, and I think it began with her.
And I think motherhood, my mother and other mothers, those who have that Black consciousness, have that social consciousness, have that futuristic type thinking, they are preparing their children for the future. And another point, we're not in control of our image. The media, in particular, are control of our image. So we can't listen to them. This is why it's important to have the Black press. This is why it's important for you, Mr. Glenn, to have this podcast. So that we have a voice now.
That's
Absolutely.
it.
Yes.
I want my collar for that.
Right. We can control, we have to be empowered enough to control our own image and tell not only the American public, but you said early on in the program that I think Black history is world history, and Ms. Moore said Black history is American history, we have to really communicate this to the world, because this racism has been exported all over the world, primarily through TV and movies.
And let me just say, we have, as much as possible, we need to tell our own story. And this is not to say that white scholars can't, write about the Black experience, but I think it's more authentic when we write about our experiences because we lived it.
Right.
And
it's just like you, Mr. Glenn. You said asked me to talk about my mother, my history, myself, right? You didn't tell me about me. You didn't tell me about my mother. You didn't tell me about my history. You respect me. And you are sensitive and you are listening and trying to understand me. That usually doesn't happen in the United States.
See, that's why I put a 5-minute window of getting to know who my guest is and getting an understanding of where they are. Because see, I could easily say, okay, these are all your superlatives from top to bottom. But then at the same time, I may be leaving out something that's gonna jog maybe the interest of somebody who is watching us and getting an understanding of what it means to do. When I say digesting Black history, I don't put the positive in there because I want you to be able to speak to your positiveness, speak to right now your power, because the power that you have in the book, the power that you've already done through graduating, getting a master, PhDs, becoming, getting your doctorate and all those different things like that, that lets me know that I got the right person sitting, in the guest seat. And that's going to give somebody, a future guest, an understanding to come back and say on June the 9th, 2024, and it could be 10 years, ago, 10 years later, they can say, I remember when Dr. Horne-Wells was sitting there talking about her book. Now, I wrote a book about my mom, and I've done all that. Because, see, I want to foresee, and I want to be a visionary enough to say, we are going to be better. I know we're going to be better, because it is that time. It's
Do
no
you
more
remember
time
President Reagan, the way they described Black women? We were welfare queens. We were having babies and always talking about the father in the home. You know what? If a woman is able to make a decent salary, I don't mean any harm, you don't have to have a father in the home. It's about money. The fact that we are at the bottom of the pay scale, African-American women have the widest wage gap, this assault on an attack on our image, acting like we're all on welfare, which is not true. Some of the most hardworking people in this country are African Americans. And I'm supportive of Black males because I know they want, that's a slow genocide. When they start attacking these young Black males, they know they're cutting off the gene line. When they kill them or maim them or put them in jail, they know they can't do like they used to do because of, worldwide outrage. So they do it slowly. And yes. I just can't, in good conscience, I can't go along with that.
Neither can I.
Mm-hmm. It's not a good survival strategy.
This leads me to this question. What would you say today to the mothers, young mothers, middle-aged mothers, on how to be a strong mother who washed, who said that's okay? Because a lot of them ain't doing it. But what would you say to today's mother?
I'm going to do like you did me. I'm going to ask them good questions. I'm going to be a good observer and a good listener. And I'm going to respect the predicament they're in because of this racist, sexist, class-oriented society that we live in. And under all that, we still rise. I'm not going to give them advice. I want to listen to them. They can maybe tell me some things. I think the assumption based on white ideology that Black people have this poor character and that they're lazy and that they're uneducated. It's not true. It's a lie. So that's why I wouldn't be telling them anything. I'll be insulting their intelligence. And I don't want to do that.
I take that in wholeheartedly because I look at so many different individuals that I deal with, and me and Gwen always talk about this. How do I look at you at one moment and tell you, you can't go there because this is my job. So I got to defend the rules at my job. But if you're going to cuss me out, I'll go back and forth and all that, then I got to stop for a second and say, now, sir or ma'am, if we were in any other situation, I would love to see that other side of you, that side that's going to give you credence to say that if I didn't have all these other things behind me that's making me act out and do this and do that, give me this opportunity to be intelligent, make an intelligent decision, and make this whole situation a whole lot better. So I do respect what you just said about that. Yeah. I do respect it.
I think the most important word in this society is respect.
Yes.
Have respect for African American women. Have respect for African American mothers and support them. That's why I read that passage. My mother had little support. And everybody can't do like she did. She was strong psychologically. She wasn't so strong physically because after all that hard work of trying to get us on our feet and up and out of the house and doing well, she got real sick. She died at 65. And before that, she was an invalid. She worked, these Black, Gwen quotes Zora Neale Hurston, and I do too. Black women are the mules of the world. Can't we see that? Can't we see how hard they're working? Can't they see that they have all these children and a lot of times with little to no support, and then people are going to turn around and talk about them on top of that?
Yeah.
It's too much.
It is a lot, way too much. I want to read a quick passage, and I'm going to let Gwen ask a few questions because this one here really is chapter 7. Parents as the first teachers. Now this one here hit me because I'm kind of dealing with it some with support from my family and everything like that. But it goes like this. There was a neighbor who was very kind and generous to Mary. When she went away to college, a woman gave her a monogram tiles and all kinds of toiletries and gifts that she would need to live in the dorms. This is where I highlighted. I began to see how thoughtful and supportive non-relatives could be, and how insensitive and thoughtless some relatives could be. We became less attached to relatives and expected less from them, and began to see and understand the practices of a community of people sharing resources, values, and the collective interests of the group. Speak to that. Speak to that.
Gwen, you want to speak to that?
Well, it made me think about getting back to the book, and you started off talking about Mill Creek. And Mill Creek was a community. People had a sense of place and space, and it was a community in the sense that we were a collective. I know sometimes we romanticize what it was like growing up in these segregated communities, but it's not romantic to say that, we have more of a sense of community and helping each other. That was very, very strong in these communities, that we had to help each other. And it made me, when you were reading that passage, it made me think about Booker T. Washington, because he had gotten this, he was going to be going to Hampton, Hampton Institute. And he said everybody in his community, they were all, they were recently emancipated. They didn't have a lot of money. And he said they all came together and put their money together, nickels, dimes, whatever, and they gave it to him so that he could go to Hampton Institute. And I think that's the kind of community that Mill Creek was in a certain sense, that there was that sense of connectedness. And I don't want to compare it to today, but I think living in that community and being so, we were kind of, I guess, almost dependent on each other, psychologically dependent, if not financially dependent, because we realized that we had to come together as a group if we were going to accomplish anything, because we had such a hostile society. That larger white society was so hostile. And I think it gets back to my point about W.E.B. Du Bois and why he thought it was so important for Black people to come together and build their communities, because he knew that we weren't going to get any help from anybody else and we had to do it ourselves. And I think that's part of what Mill Creek was like, that we had to come together. And I'm not saying that everybody loved each other and all of that stuff. I don't think that's true. But we realized that we had to help each other, that it was critical just for our survival. Well, that's my opinion. And I think that's what I think about when I think about Mill Creek. I just remember everybody being very supportive. And I remember when we moved to our other community, that was not necessarily the case.
Yeah, we lost a lot of that community.
Mm-hmm.
And that was by design.
Yeah, and I remember interviewing this is not a woman that grew up in Mill Creek. I think she grew up in the Ville, when she was talking about, I think it was her, but she was saying, no, it wasn't her. But this woman said, you know, we lost so much. We gained some things, but we lost what we had. Why couldn't we keep what we had on top of, if we moved into this integrated community that was, like you said, was integrated for a hot minute until all the white people left. But, it's something that we lost. And I think that you were talking about younger people and knowing our history, without romanticizing segregation, because I'm not going to romanticize it. It was a way of really trying to put barriers to keep Black people from advancing. But because they put those barriers there, we had to rely so heavily on each other. And I think that for the most part, it worked. If you read anything from this period, all they talk about is self-help and advancing the race. They were obsessed with that. We've got to advance the race. We got to help each other. That's why they called it self-help, because they know we weren't going to get any help from somebody else and we had to help each other.
I had to ask this question. Now, during those times and what we can see today, and how we can just say, is there any kind of way we think we can get that back? That togetherness, because it's like it's so needed that we can get that togetherness back, like what you guys are talking about. You think we can get that back?
It might not always happen in the same way that we had it decades ago, because we're now in the 21st century. But our psychological healthiness, our intellectual understanding of our history and our present situation, that as a collective, like they call it identity politics, it's nothing, even though some whites, not all, but conservative whites will criticize Black people when we try to come together as a group, as a collective. They call it identity politics and try to eschew it or reject it. But it's now a meeting of the minds, whether you live in a predominantly white neighborhood or a multicultural neighborhood or a Black neighborhood. It's a coming of the minds, reading, observing, being curious, Why am I living this way? Are you going to believe that you're living this way because you're inferior? Do you actually believe that? No, you're not inferior. You're an equal, and you've always been an equal. In some situations, you're a superior. So, there's always been African Americans who thought like this. But times change, and as soon as we get on at a certain level, what happens? What do you think?
We stop giving ourselves the credence to work, because work can always be in the midst. Working how you get to that point, and you still got to keep working. But we stop working.
And why did we stop working? Because racist institutions came in and disrupted that progress. Think about it.
Let me
they say nowadays, Google it.
Let me just add that, and I'm going to go back to W.B. Du Bois, because he's someone that I respect the way his deep insights. But he thought that these communities, what he called this voluntary segregation, and he called it segregation without discrimination. But he thought that these strong Black communities was a way of fighting racism by showing what we could do. And we talk about how we get back to that. Well, we're at a different time now.
Right.
Context is different. We can't go back. We have to, there's another way of dealing with racism that will have to work for the 21st century. Even though segregation, legal segregation, has been dismantled, we still have segregation. We know that. We can know that from just looking at St. Louis. Black people live in certain places, white people live in certain places. It's a segregated society. We're dealing with a white supremacist state government. There's a lot. Things have changed. White people are not openly saying you can't come into this restaurant the way they used to. They can't openly say you can't get a room in this hotel. They cannot openly say you cannot come in this theater because you're Black, which they used to do.
Yeah.
Their tactics have changed, and our tactics have to change to meet with this present day racism that is no longer legal apartheid. Because we had apartheid in this country, legal apartheid, before they had it in South Africa. And as we know, Hitler kind of looked at what was going on in this country and said, that's the way they treat Black people over there. Maybe we can treat Jews like that over here in Germany. We were the paragons of racism, the paragons of apartheid, the paragons of racism. And I think that's part of that history, getting back to the history. That's part of the history that they're trying to suppress now. That's why it's so important that we deal with the truth. Even if it's painful, we still have to deal with it. And I always say, it amazes me that Black people have done as well as they have done. When you consider what we've been through. I think Black people are amazing.
Right.
That we've been able to fight this racism. Until this, what was the last, 1968 was when they passed the last civil rights bill?
The
Fair Housing Act.
Fair Housing Act.
1968. That's recent history.
Yeah.
And they're still practicing discrimination because they learn how to get around these rules.
The Voting Rights Act, 1964, Black people couldn't vote. And just because they passed that law didn't mean all of a sudden white people said, oh, okay, you can vote now. They fought it. The Black decision, 1954. Eisenhower had to send federal troops into Arkansas to make sure that little Black kids could go to a white school.
And Gwen, didn't you say that, I don't know what year, but African-American males couldn't go to high school, or was it college?
No. In this city, if you were a black male, this was before St. Louis U was decided to admit blacks. There was no college in the state that would admit black males. And some people say, well, Eden Theological Seminary, but suppose you didn't want to be, you didn't want to go to a seminary. And they just said they didn't bar blacks, but how many blacks had actually went there? And so that's why Herman Dreer started Douglas University. Now, if you were a woman, you could go to Stowe and Sumner Normal School and then Stowe Teachers College, but it was for women only. So if you were a man, after you graduated from high school, you couldn't go to college. So that's why, yeah. So just think about that. Think about the head start that so many white males have. White males can go anywhere they wanted to go to college. Black males couldn't. So if you once you graduated from high school, unless you left the state, that was it for you.
Right.
That's it.
So getting back to your question, Mr. Glenn, I don't think you can recreate the past. You can't rebuild Mill Creek the way it was before. You can't rebuild Tulsa, Greenwood. And then I found out recently there were hundreds of Black communities that they destroyed.
Exactly.
These are the ones that they talk about, you know, Juneteenth and Black History Month. Hundreds. We have to keep our eye on these powerful institutions that quietly and surreptitiously disrupt our progress. So we can't turn around and say, after I've hobbled you, I've shot you in both kneecaps. Now I want to know why you can't walk.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna force you to answer me.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of balls is that?
Ridiculous. All I can say is like what Gwen has said. How did we do it? And let's keep doing more of it to be able to get through these racist tactics, all this other stuff they're doing or have done. And that's why I keep a positive mindset. That's why I don't let nobody come on here and be salacious. I said, we can talk about history. Let's talk about the positiveness about history. And let's talk about the heroes and sheroes that went through all these travesties, you know, Jim Crow and, you know, apartheid and all these different things like that. And to be successful. I mean, you got to look at the history, how many PhDs and doctorates and everything that people have obtained throughout all these trials.
Let me just say so. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, you know,
trials and tribulation that they had to go through.
Exactly.
You know, and I stand on that, what you just said, Gwen, about that. You know, how did they, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when I'm reading about the past, even the 20s, the 30s, even before that, the 19th century, and you think about these Black people that achieved so much, and you think about what the barriers that they faced and the roadblocks and the racism, which is a lot worse than it is now. And you think they're inspirational. So besides my mother, who was inspirational, my neighbors who were inspirational, my community that was inspirational and supportive, I find a lot of inspiration from those, like you talked about, those sheroes and heroes, from the men and women of the past. I'm amazed by W.B. Du Bois. I'm amazed by Marcus Garvey. You know, I'm amazed by Rosa Parks.
Ida B. Wells Barnett, my hero.
Ida B. Wells Barnett, you know,
my hero.
Hurston. There's so many. It's so many that are inspirational that we can draw from. We can draw from our past and be so proud of our past.
Yeah, we don't have to always focus on celebrities. Why don't we focus on the ones that created opportunities for us to enjoy in 2024? We're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, and we have to honor our ancestors and remember our ancestors.
And
And
let me just add our teachers.
and our
We
teachers.
talk about our neighbors and our community, but those teachers were part of our community and they were inspirational too.
And let me say this about my mother. A lot of people, after they read the book, they say, oh, I wish I had known your mother. But my mother was so unassuming. If you saw her with us out, I don't think anybody would have taken a double take. You don't know what's going on inside these homes, because she was modest and unassuming. She had a mission, and she was extremely focused. She was laser focused on one thing. She wanted her children not to be poor. She wanted her children to be educated. And she succeeded, and a lot of other Black mothers have succeeded as well.
Well, you know, maybe we can talk about, I'm wondering, you talked about your early life, and what happened with you later in life, and how did what you learned from your community, what you learned from your mother, from your siblings,
Well, you
that
know what?
shaped you?
Because of that congressman from Florida who talked about Jim Crow not being so bad. He said Black families were more together. That's what he said. And then he started blaming the poverty, it was the Great Society, Lyndon Johnson and
The Great Society, yeah.
HEW. I remember graduating from high school. I was in college. I was trying to look for a job. I couldn't get a job anywhere. And I remember this one white interviewer wanted to hire me, but he kind of hinted. He saw my potential. He saw my talent, but he kind of hinted he couldn't hire me because I was Black. And one of the things that I learned is that the customers probably would have protested, and the other employees would probably have protested. So, you know, you're talking about going to the school of hard knocks. So when Lyndon Johnson had that neighborhood youth corps, and I went down there with long lines of African-American youth, we all wanted to work. This is the strange thing about this country, thinking that Black people don't want to work. Are you kidding me? In the land of all these riches, you need money. And I was hired as a civil courts building through the neighborhood youth corps and I worked for Congress Pearlie Evans in the civil courts building. That was my first real job. And then after that, I got a job in Mercantile Trust Company. And that's how I got my financial literacy lessons about saving and investing. And then after that, I worked at the welfare office. That opportunity that President Johnson gave me was critical, because then I started having work experience. And I was working for, a fairly big institution. And after that, with that, like they say, equal opportunity, with that equal opportunity, I was able to take off. So I think that people need to be careful when they're trying to make political points, how they can really hurt programs that are designed to pull people out of poverty.
Exactly.
Only for their selfish, for selfish reasons. And then, of course, I was able to go to UMSL after going to Forest Park Community College, go to UMSL, majored in sociology because you majored in sociology, take classes with you so I could learn more about how to study and how to succeed. And then, after, you helped me, I've had so many mentors like you. My younger sister mentored me, but, I didn't have a big ego, obviously. And then going on to graduate school, and the rest is history. But what's his name, Byron Donalds or whatever, when he was talking the other day, I thought it took me back to the neighborhood youth corps.
Right.
And that program helped a lot of people. These conservatives do not want social programs for African Americans,
Right.
period. Suppose I hadn't had that opportunity. I probably would have struggled and got a little something, but that really helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think I got my first job as a teenager
Mm-hmm.
through the neighborhood youth corps,
Okay.
because I wouldn't have been able to get a job otherwise. And I was assigned to the Mart building, which was in a working for the Army.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Which,
this is, people might be upset with the congressman from Florida about talking about Jim Crow like it wasn't so bad. People are outraged, and so am I,
mhm.
because he's lying and he's throwing Black people under the bus, Black youth.
I know we are getting like past that time. I didn't want to go too long, but I did want to go long enough for us to really, really get to know who Dr. Arthur Malaika Horne-Wells is. So we want to thank you so much for you just coming on and being a beacon of hope. Beacon of hope. We always say in so many ways that this podcast sets up so many people to be better. That's why I attached it to the Betterment Road. So we can understand that our history is powerful. Our time on this earth has not been in vain. And what we have to do for this next generation is show them how to do it better. So I want to let you have a few more words to send us off, as well as Gwen. And then that's how we're going to wrap this up. And then we
Well,
may, and we're going to definitely get all of you all, at one particular time when I can, get all the siblings on of host Gwen Moore, because I know she has a fantastic family, and I'm so proud to be a part of knowing my history. You all from St. Louis, y'all like extended family to me, because I done had Gerald on, I done had you on, and I'm looking forward to my namesake Marvin. And let me say one more thing. Your name, before you change it, was Beverly, right?
yeah.
That's my mother's name.
Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll let you guys finish.
Well,
We're gonna finish it up, but close us out, Gwen.
Well, I'm going to give Dr. Horn the last word. Let me say that we're glad that you came on to talk about uh, mothers, mothers in that community, that community of Mule Creek that I think more people should know about as well.
well, never underestimate a Black mother. There's nothing
Yeah,
like a mother's. Nobody's gonna love you like your mother.
That's true.
That's
so true.
love can overcome tremendous obstacles, the way our Black mothers have done since time immemorial. And you, Mr. Glenn, you were talking about passing it on to the next generation, which I wholeheartedly agree. But we received information from the generation before us. Not only a great mother, I had great mentors. I had people who I wouldn't be where I am without these mentors, mostly Black. In fact, probably all Black. Black women in particular, but also Black men. Senator Bass, he was a mentor. He was the one that recommended me for the Board of Curators. Elizabeth Garlington, she was a mentor. She got me on all these different boards. Even though I'm doing volunteer work, it opened up my world, opened up my networks. Georgia Roussan, Ted Hudson, the committee man from the 19th Ward. He was my mentor. I had so many mentors. So it's not like I didn't receive anything from the generation before me. I did. So what I'm going to do is pass it on to the next generation. And oh, Bill Harvey, Dr. Bill Harvey, who was my boss for a long time, gave me carte blanche when I became second in command in running a drug treatment center. That was a gift, because when I became an administrator at UMSL, I was more than ready. When I got on the Board of Curators, I was more than ready. They thought working at a drug treatment center, I wouldn't be able to handle this highfalutin stuff in Columbia, Missouri. I told them, because they hinted that, I said, I worked at a drug treatment center. This is a piece of cake. And it was. So don't tell me about my ancestors. Don't tell me about my peers. I will tell you, and then I will try to influence the younger generation to continue our proud legacy. And let me say one last thing, quoting my hero, Reverend Jesse Jackson, keep hope alive.
Amen. Amen. Well, see now, that's another great guest we've had on here. So, like, share, and subscribe to Digesting Black History 365 podcast. And we're going to continue to keep on bringing on great guests so they can influence you. So once again, I'm sure that you had your notebooks out. I always tell you, get your notebooks out, because me and Gwen, we bring very important guests onto Digesting Black History 365 podcast. So once again, thank you again, Dr. Malaika Horne-Wells, for sharing us, giving us your time, sharing your book, and we know you got more in store. So we look forward to having you back on real soon.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Gwen. God bless you all, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And let me just say this one more time. Our history is the world's history. So indulge in it, digest it, and share it. God bless you.